Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all the backbenchers up there. Yeah, this is good too. I echo Ek King by saying thank you very much for being with us today. It's a Saturday afternoon. On top of it, all the roads around Parliament Place are now closed to traffic. So good luck getting out of here later. But you got in. That's what's important. If you're lucky and you stay a little bit long enough in this area, you might be able to see the fireworks that go off because it's the preview show of the National Day Parade at the floating platform. So if you came with your darling, then maybe you can pak tor there and have dinner and then watch the fireworks. So we're going into our session, what do we call this session? Plenary session. Is there a name for it? English in the Singaporean Home. Okay, so my panelists are people that you will know when I mention their names. You've already met Jeff. Jeff has 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, 13, 11, and 8. And 8. So you know Jeff's story. And this is William Grosse. William is a master teacher of English with ELIS, which is the English Language Institute of Singapore. And at the end is Melanie Lee. And she is a writer. She writes with the A-List magazine. I'm Susan Ng, and I work part of my time with MediaCorp. I used to be full-time there, but no longer. I do work there part of the time, but my part of the time is such a long time that people forget I'm actually part-time and I think I'm full-time, but that's fine. I have spent about 40 years. Yeah, it's true. 40 years at MediaCorp. I now am with 938 Live. My growing up years were a little bit different from Jeff and Adrian. You heard their stories when we started. Mine was an English-speaking home. I'm Peranakan, so we spoke English and we spoke Malay. So my albatross was Mandarin. And I really didn't do so good. If there was one red color in my report book, all the way till the end was Chinese. But as I grew up, I did what Adrian and Jeff did. I realized that Mandarin can be quite an interesting language because I found interests. So for Jeff and Adrian, it was the books that they read, the stories that they were able to get themselves immersed in. And when I started work was actually when I began speaking that language a lot more. And for us, English, that kind of story might also be true. For Jeff, he started speaking English a lot more when he went to secondary school. And he runs a creative agency now, an advertising agency, a global agency. His clients are international, and he works internationally. I think Jeff is out of the country a lot more than he's in. So he's a global citizen. With many of us who have kids in school, I know sometimes we worry a lot. Sometimes we place a lot of emphasis on certain things that we would like our children to do and not do. I'd like to think that maybe we need to give them the basics, that's without a doubt. But maybe we need to relax a little bit. And if we took Jeff's story and Adrian's story, it's not a bad thing, right? One's a lawyer and one's a creative agency head. So perhaps English in the Singaporean home is something we want to take with a light touch. But we still want to maintain standard English. I do agree with Ek King and Jeff and Adrian that we need to speak a standard of English that can be understood by anyone in any part of the world. You don't need a 5-syllable word when a 1 or 2-syllable word is good enough. Otherwise, it'll be like an ad or a campaign that is too painful, right? So we're going to let our panelists speak first of all, introduce themselves. We've already met Jeff, so we'll meet William and we'll meet Melanie. And then we want to hear your questions and take your questions as well. So don't hold back, because this is a session where I think sharing is going to be important. What you do in the home, what our panelists suggest that you might want to try at home from the point of view of being parents. All three are parents. William has a 22-year-old daughter, and Melanie has a 5-year-old son. So we're going to meet William Grosse now.
Hi, afternoon everyone. I was a primary school teacher for 28 years before becoming a master teacher for the past 6. I come from an English-speaking background. When I was a teacher, we often had orientation sessions for parents, to when they come to the school, and parents often point at me, expat teacher, because of my name, and sometimes because of the way I talk. I'm not sure why. But I'm a Singaporean, served national service, 50 years, yay. And when I was growing up, my grandmother is Cantonese, so I spoke Cantonese when I was growing up, although I spoke English. And my parents forced me to take Mandarin as a third language, so I had Mandarin tuition. For me, the title is very interesting because I see the home as wherever parents are with their children. It's not just a concrete construct, the house. So wherever and whenever we are with our children, home is there. And I think that home is very important because I was sharing with some of them, the home provides both the security and the safety, and also the energy to want to use the language, to want to savor the language, to want to explore the language. Home is where we start learning things. And I think sometimes my title is a misnomer of sorts, master teacher. I would like to see myself as a very senior learner. And I think that kind of orientation needs to be given to how we encounter language at home. We are learning the language, we are using the language, and in using the language, we learn so much more about the language. So I would like to encourage you to help your children encounter the language in very loving ways. Whenever parents come to meet me at parents-teachers conference, they always ask me, Mr. Grosse, what do I do, as a parent? And I always tell them, love your children. Love them as best as you can. And in loving them, you will know what to do when you want them to encounter this wonderful, wonderful thing called the English language.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Melanie. As Susan mentioned, I am a writer for the A-List, which is an arts magazine. So I have a lot of freelance editorial experience. And for me, that has taught me a lot about what Jeff was talking about, like simplifying English in a way that most readers who understand English will be able to understand what I'm saying in a story. But besides the editorial freelance writing work that I do, I've also written a picture book series. It's called The Adventures of Squirky the Alien, and I wrote it in inspiration. I was inspired by my son to write the picture book series. And as I was reflecting on this topic, I realized that I never really articulated as I was deciding, in deciding to be what a kind of certain parent. I never really thought about. I didn't say I will teach my son excellent English. I never thought that, because I think it was always implied. It was always intrinsic as part of me wanting to be a good parent. I wanted to instill a love of the English language, just like my mother did. I think with Susan and with William, I did grow up in an English-speaking background. My mother was a primary school teacher, and she was very phobic of Singlish. For some strange reason. But I am not so much so. I think code switching is fine, and I just probably will leave with this anecdote when one day my son and I were in this taxi together, and the taxi uncle was very impressed with the way my son was speaking English. He was like, "Boy, very good, I don't speak any Singlish, not like all the other children I come across there." And then my son just replied, "God, meh." So, and I kind of he kind of made me laugh, but also made me realize I hope that he will enjoy that process of being able to switch around and enjoying the intricacies of Singlish and how it's such a local part of our culture. But at the same time, also enjoying, good books, good stories, and I'll probably tell a bit more later. I'll leave it. Susan, do you want to start off the questions?
We'll have Jeff say a few things as well, because intricacies of English is what Jeff has to deal with on a daily basis, not just at the workplace. He has 3 children, remember? And one of his children is the English police.
Yes, that will be my son. I think as I mentioned earlier on in the keynote dialogue, when I started exhibiting this struggle in the English language when I was in secondary school, my parents took notice of that. Being both who are non-English speaker, I think the natural instinct for them was to, provide English reading materials for me daily, right? And what did they do? I think they probably did the best gift for me, that they subscribed to Straits Times. Well, I mean, it was the easiest thing they could do for us. Back then, I had no concept on, the quality of news and all that, but it was just like stories for me to read. So they institutionalized like a daily reading program, and I would be kind of like encouraged, not forced. The papers was always accessible for us there, and we started this whole habit of reading daily, and that saw an improvement in the language, in understanding, and also we had the habit of circling words and looking up in the dictionary. So that was fond memories, and I kind of brought that into my family right now. I spend morning breakfast with my 3 kids before they go to school. We would just browse through. We wouldn't do like deep reading. We would just browse through the headlines so that they know also like what's happening around the world. So they had a lot of fun reading about Trump. And it's quite interesting to see how they have grown to like the language as well. So I thought as a parent, the one thing that I want to make accessible for them is also reading materials. But that's it. I do agree with Melanie. The one thing that we must kind of impart on them is the ability to code switch as well, because Adrian did talk about if we spoke like the Queen's English at all times to everybody that we see, we may somehow put ourselves in a situation where we alienate the other person. But I think that's not to say that we deliberately speak at a different hierarchy. We just need to be very sensitive to that. So the kids in school, I was quite surprised when they started kindergarten. So before that, they spoke really proper English. But the moment they start the kindergarten and they got back from the school, and my youngest, my son, the firstborn, when he started to, what was the first English he spoke? He said something like, tomorrow got spelling, but this one, like, I can't remember, but it was a combination of la, me, and it just went on and on. And we were quite surprised. But the first encounter for that, it was actually quite cute. When you hear like a child speaks English, right, and then you try to encourage it, but then later on when it comes to a point that they weren't able to code switch back, right, then it's like, oh no, what have we done? so we need to pull back a little bit. But these days, I think as a family we have a lot of fun. My son is a grammar police, and sometimes he catch me off guard if I spoke in a wrong sentence, right, and then he will correct me. And what we do is, even as we're walking, the girls, if they said something wrong, then I'll give them the death stare, and then she will. It's like the Google autocorrect, and then she will rephrase the thing again. Then I'll say thank you. Then we just moved on. So it's quite fun as a family as we do that. So I think family at home, English at home, it's a constant kind of like a workshop for us as we sharpen each other.
Yeah, important points. Family is important. Fun is highly important. And the importance of code switching is truly important, especially when we are adults and we are in the work world. And where I work, it's very important. And because I work with our younger colleagues who come into us as newbies, and some of them forget to code switch, and so I say, you know, when you have to go interview a minister, you do not want to speak like that. Code switching is important, but we also want to make it fun for our kids so that it's not all about, you know, another tuition at home with the parents. Code switching is important because we talk to different people. You want to communicate with the persons. I don't speak like this all of the time. I do because I have to. And then it becomes habit. And then I do it all the time. But when I'm in the canteen and I see the Malay stall holder, I speak Malay. And then the next stall is a Chinese chicha stall, so I speak Cantonese because the chef's from Malaysia. And then the next stall, across the way, I have to speak Mandarin because the chefs are from China. See, so in one lunch buying session, I speak 3 languages, and then when the lady who cleans up after us comes along, I speak Hokkien because that's her language. That's required because we do want to make connections. And Jeff makes the connections with his kids, and William makes the connections with his students as well. And you do this. You visit the schools. I know you train teachers, but you visit schools as well. And so since we're on family, let's talk about the importance of family, where learning of a language is important.
As I was trying to say, I think the home is a very interesting idea, and in a place, I still remember, because when my daughter was born, she grew up in an English language environment, and the second language had to be Mandarin because the mother is Chinese. And so we were debating, when do we start introducing Mandarin to her? And I still remember we were at a playground, and we saw a Chinese boy. And we asked our daughter, can go and speak to the Chinese boy. And she went to the boy and said, 苹果, 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 throughout. And then we said, we're in trouble. So we had to figure out, and so the converse goes for English also. When we talk about writing, for example, a law in writing or an exam writing is we write what we know. We write what we know. And I think in the home, it's the perfect place to start acknowledging and working with the curiosity, the innate curiosity of the child. And to build that curiosity, to honor, to acknowledge, and to build it. There's so many things worth knowing in the home. Wherever you go, there is your home. You bring your home with you when you go shopping. You bring your home with you when you go to the market. You bring your home with you everywhere. And one of the first things I believe children are very, very good observers. They observe things all around them. And language is the perfect way to both capture and nurture that art of observation. What do you see? Why is what you see so wonderful? Why does it capture your attention? Why do you keep counting the number of poles as we go and walk up to the market? That's what my daughter does. She counts the poles, it's one of those things. And you engage in conversation. So it can be very tiring because a 5-minute walk to the market takes half an hour. Because she just wants to talk to you about everything that she sees. But it's a habit that is inculcated from young. There are so many things worth talking about. They need not be academic. So, in a sense, the environment that we have around us, the home, provides us with a very rich linguistic environment in which we can encounter with our children. So, the idea that I don't know what to talk about, so on and so forth. We don't know what to talk about because we are oblivious to the things that are around us. So there are many rich opportunities for us to use English. Many. We don't have to talk about abstract concepts, so on and so forth. There are many things. Because we use language, because we give importance to the things that we have, we want to describe them, we want to talk about them, we want to share them, we want to connect with them. And home is the place where you make the best connections.
And I think we don't need to be so afraid to start conversations. I've met parents who say, but we don't know what to talk about. We need a topic. It's not essay writing. You don't need a topic. It can be anything. It can be the food you had for lunch today. It can be the weather's terrible outside. It could be someone you saw doing something on your way home. Anything is a topic for a conversation. And I think when we are with our children, that is one of the things to remember. It doesn't matter if your son is 26 and in university, or your son is 5 and just in kindergarten. Anything can be a topic.
I think I just wanted to add something. I'm not sure how many of you here are parents, and you may feel like I'm not very good in English, but I want my kids to be good in English. Are there any parents out here that are in this position? Can I just find out? Or you could talk to me a bit later. But there's this one example I wanted to show. It's not my life story, but it was just something that really struck me when I saw this topic. So I write for arts magazine, The A-List, and just a few months ago, I interviewed this young lady. Her name is Nuralia Norsid, and she won the Epigram Books Fiction Prize last year. She wrote a really, really thick fantasy novel in English, and it's called The Gatekeeper. And it's a wonderful novel. If you've seen a bookshop, please buy it. Great on the train. But besides that, when I was interviewing her, she actually shared a lot about her family background. And she told me that both her parents are Malay-speaking. They speak very little English. And yet, somehow, she and her 2 brothers are very, very competent in English. She has a PhD in English literature. And she actually told me it's because of the routines that they encouraged from young. So one is, of course, we could talk more about that later, is going to the library regularly. And they made it a rule that they had to borrow at least 1 English fiction book and 1 non-fiction English book every week. That was like a rule in the house. And that sort of helped to build up the English language capabilities of her and her 2 brothers. And at the same time, when she would ask, like, can I have my own book? They were very poor. They could not afford to buy storybooks. And her father would buy her blank notebooks. And, like the whole idea of being creative, the father would give her the blank notebook and tell her, you write your own story. And she would do that, and she would sort of rewrite fairy tales. Those that she found like have a very lame ending. She would write her own fairy tales, and she would bring them to class, show them to her classmates, and she kind of had a little book club, like all classmates wanted to read her alternative take on fairy tales. And I think that was a really great background, like grounding in her getting engaged in language, despite, so-called her home circumstances were not the most ideal or the most privileged, but I think through certain activities, certain routines, her love of the English language really, really blossomed.
Yeah, the love of the language is something that can be nurtured, and it can be nurtured from young. Melanie's story would be the same as Jeff and William and mine, where when we were growing up, we spent time reading. And my parents did the same thing. We would go to the library every week, and we were fortunately in a position where we were taken to bookstores every Sunday, and we were allowed to pick out our own books, and we would purchase them. So we spent a lot of time reading. The other thing I'd like to say about the language, any language, is we talked about reading a lot, right? Reading aloud is very important. Reading in your head is one thing, because when you read quietly in your head, you see a word, you understand it, but you may not know how to say it. But reading aloud gives you the opportunity to know whether or not you're able to say that word or not. And if you can't, anyone with a smartphone can now Google pronunciation of words. In the Singapore context, we tend to use British pronunciation a lot more, so route instead of route. And that is at your fingertips. So I encourage you, if you have young children, and I'm sure Melanie does this at home, and Jeff too, read aloud with the children. It can be any time during the day. You can read anything. If the kids love football, read the football pages of the newspaper. And if the kids like any particular topic, those are the things you should go for. One of the speakers earlier mentioned interest. Content has to be interesting to the child, not to you. You may love football, guys, right? But if you have children, your sons who don't enjoy football, no point getting them to read the football pages or the sports pages of the newspaper. So how many parents do we have in the audience? Yeah, sure. Yeah, grandparent is a parent as well, because you're a parent. Oh, and the rest are not parents? You have kids with you, so you're not parent. You are the auntie? Are you a parent? Okay, again, one more time. Parent, mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa. And the rest? Just shout out why you're here. Why are you here with us today in this particular forum? Pardon? Topic's interesting. Great. Okay, I like that so much. So we're now going to open it to the floor. We're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers. Yes, one hand up already. Yeah, the microphone will come to you. There you go.
Sometimes when we speak with native speakers, I mean they are from overseas, they know that we speak grammatically good English, but they cannot understand us because our emphasis on the consonants, I don't know what that means, is wrong, they say.
Yeah.
So how can we learn to correct it? People like me in my 60s, I learned it probably from BBC or from the radio where 938 Live.
Oh, I do hope that we get it right.
Every day. Thank
all
you.
All the time. Okay. So I think that is not uncommon to hear. Our three speakers probably get that. One of the reasons why I find that people don't understand us is because we speak really fast. I see many people nodding. It's because we don't have time, we're running, right? So from this door to that, you're giving an instruction. And oh, huh? What was that? You understand it, but the listener did not. That's one of the reasons. The other thing about pronunciation, ma'am, sorry, your name is? Mrs. Lim. Mrs. Lim, is sometimes we've learned how to say a particular word or particular words from people who may not have said it right in the first place. You have a smartphone, Google pronunciation of, and then find Oxford or Cambridge, Daniel Jones. These are our Bibles, and they will give you correct pronunciations. If you want the American pronunciation, you can do that too. You always have British and American pronunciations. And that's what I do.
Just to add on that, I just got back from London 2 months ago. So this is real life, okay? So I was with my colleagues and some friends. We took a taxi, and we had to drop him off to another hotel because he was extending, and then we were on our way to the airport. And then he gave the direction, right? Very confidently, without showing the map and all that. And he peered through that glass, that window, and say, I want to go to this hotel. It's at Hyde Park. And then the driver, what? I said, Hyde Park. Then we were behind. I said, oh, I think you need to stretch the Hyde a little bit longer. The Hyde Park.
Yes.
And then we tried. Hyde Park. There's a, oh, and the taxi driver replied, oh, Hyde Park. I say, okay, I understand. So it's true. We not only hold the record of being the fastest walker in the world, but we do speak very fast. But that's not to say that we need to deliberately speak slower. You know, there's always this tendency if the person who don't understand us and they say, "Do you understand the word?" No, we don't have to do that. I think it's be deliberate in pronouncing the word, and I think that's important.
Yeah, take your time to say the words. More questions? Any other questions? We're amongst friends here. Yes, ma'am.
I have a very young son. He's almost 3, actually next month. So we started early by reading to him picture book and etc. And he's an early talker as well. And until to the day that he went to preschool, about 2 years old. And then we found out suddenly that he came back to school with a lot of influences on Singlish. Like instead of turn off the light, he would say off the light. Or, and also in terms of what the lady just now mentioned, the emphasis on the wrong syllabus, etc. Example, just now you say colleague, actually probably is colleague instead of colleague, right? It's very Singaporean thing. So
That was a test and you passed it.
so I know that probably I'm just, as a parent, I'm too early to worry about it, because a lot of people told me that when children grow older, probably into 5 or 6 years, they begin to understand what is standard English, what is probably local context, and they may be able to code switch. But still, I would like to hear more experience from you, that how in the context of a family, a home, we can try to counter this kind of influence that they brought back from school.
Okay, so I'm just going to share an idea that I do with my son quite often, and to me it's a lazy way. It's parenting convenience tip number 103. But anyway, what I do is at night, he loves bedtime stories, and most of the time he likes original bedtime stories. At some point, I think last year, I actually started recording him telling his own stories. And when I play it back, he feels really like, wow, like he's a celebrity. It's just your handphone recorder. But what I notice is that sometimes he wants to re-record certain things because he realizes that he didn't sound so clear at some part, or he sound like, the sentence was a bit iffy. So he would repeat, the same story, but try to express himself better. So I found that, like by boosting the ego a bit and, like recording, and then I would pretend to take notes, so he thinks I'm really, really engaged in what he has to say. But then he feels the need to, he makes more of an effort to be more creative with his expression, and I noticed that sometimes he would describe things like he wouldn't in daily conversation. Like suddenly he'll be like, his head is flat as a pancake, and I'm like, huh, where did he get that kind of like analogy from? But you realize it starts to come out when he sees that I am listening to him and I'm very interested in what he has to say. But that's just my tip. But maybe, yeah, William.
I think like Jeff, my daughter, when she first went to primary 1, and we allowed her to go on a school bus, and she came back speaking an English which I found very interesting, because it didn't come from our home. And but what I believe and what I thought was that you see, when I work with people, I always tell them these 3 things. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's more effective, less effective, right? So I know that part of my job as a parent is to provide an environment with different language stimulus. So like, for example, when I watch TV with her, I actually watch TV with her so that I can talk to her about the program. So I make sure we watch programs that, documentaries. I have to watch every Disney program that comes on, because that's the job of a father, to show interest in, right? And we talk about it. And so she will encounter different sorts of Englishes, but the kind of English that I help her encounter in the home is an English that, well, is my English, right? So I don't say bad or good. And so what I want her to understand is a respect for the different sorts of English, but the English we have at home, I feel, if I build the proper foundation, and so like Jeff, she's a sort of, now she'll tell me, Daddy, you know, your English is slipping a bit, are you getting old or something? I said, hey, watch it. But yeah, so I'll tell her, master teacher, hey, yeah. And but so it's I think you don't have to be worried in that sense, because as a parent, I'm always aware there are things that are not within my control. I can't police her and say, okay, you only talk to friends who speak proper English, or I can't do that, because she's going to be exposed to a huge variety of Englishes in that sense. But the variety that I would like her to encounter and work with, I have control, right? So it's not good or bad, but I will make sure that if I can control the encounters with the English that she's exposed to in the home, I will do that. I just came across a picture it's my wife's favorite picture. It's at the zoo on my daughter's 2nd birthday. and we're watching Aming, the orangutan, and all orang. I'm sitting on one end of the bench, and she's there, and we're talking to one another. We're talking to one another about what we are seeing. Yeah. So, yeah, parents should cherish, so see every opportunity as not what I want to teach you, but what I want to learn together with you. Because when you learn about the environment, you learn about your children, you learn about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I encourage you not to give up what you're doing at home. The family environment, and family is wherever you are with your child, is very important. So don't give up on speaking standard English or speaking properly with your son. And the thing about code switching, I know we mentioned this several times, and I whispered to Jeff about code switching. You cannot code switch if you don't know what to switch to. If you only know one way, there's no way to switch. So you've got to know the right way or the standard way, and then if there's another way, another type of English, and then you switch as you go. And I think all of us in this room do that on a daily basis, but we know where to switch to. So continue what you're doing at home, and it's great. And as your son grows up, as my son did. My son is now 22, the same age as William's daughter. When he entered national service, wow, okay, he learned another language. Really. So there's always a time to learn a language, and the children know what to do. But I think you give them, my belief, this is a personal belief, that we do need to give them the foundations in any language we want to teach them, whether it's English or Mandarin or Malay. But in this case, since we're talking about English, the foundation is important. And I encourage you to do what you're doing at home with him. I'm sure you read to him, you read aloud, and that's important. Questions? Yes, sir. Okay, there's one up there in the back bench. Yeah, right, first row.
Assuming your children already know how to speak standard English, would you then speak Singlish with them as well?
A yes and no question, and I'll give you a yes and no answer. My answer is no, so I'll leave it to them. I don't speak English to my children. My son, I only have one son, by the way.
Yeah, this is not a Singlish-English issue. Like, so my brother lives in Australia, and he's married to a Caucasian lady. And I remember when my daughter was about 4 years old, she brought out to the zoo for a day, just one day, out. And she came back, and she said, "Daddy, we went on a pony. We had a pony ride. It was fun." I was like, "Who is this girl?" And it was just one day. But I'm just trying to reemphasize the idea of exposure, right? So if you want your children to speak English in the way you're comfortable with, and the way I'm comfortable with, the English I want her to speak, she'll be exposed to it. I don't speak English at home because I speak English at home.
Because you're a master teacher.
No, it's not that. I'm very comfortable with the way I speak. But when I tell my daughter, like what you pointed out, when I go to the market, if I go to the coffee shop, I have a favorite coffee shop where I love the coffee. If I told him, "Good morning, sir, can I partake of a fine cup of your wonderful beverage?" He'll look at me like, "What's going on," right? So I'll just say, actually I don't have to say anything because he knows me. I just like that, and then he knows what I want. But, so that's another form of communication. Yeah, so I don't know whether I answered your question. Yeah.
You speak standard English at home with your children? You're 18. Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't see how old you are from here. And on whose behalf are you asking that question? Just a general question?
As in, we are linguistics students.
You're a linguistics student. I encourage you to speak standard English all the time. Don't hide your faces, ladies, gentlemen, too.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, sorry, Jeff, anything to say
Maybe
to
just to add on that, like in our family, we don't deliberately speak it, but sometimes we do for various reasons. I mean, they could be trying to make fun of a situation, or it's really for bonding. And then it's just for a short episode, and then after that we have a good laugh over it. And when I say like my kids, like when they speak like really proper Singlish, right, it's really funny. Because there is a certain a grammar and a structure in it, which is correct Singlish, and of course then there will be a banter going on, and it's quite fun. But then after that we move on, right? Life is back to normal.
Yes. I understand that there's a difference in the way Singaporeans speak English as compared to like probably British speakers and American speakers. In the way we stress different consonants, and the way we speak is syllable time, and the way the standard English speakers speak it is stress time. But the thing is, if the way we speak, right, is intelligible to a native speaker, then do we converge to the way they speak it, even though they understand the way we pronounce it? Yeah. Thanks. Teacher?
Teacher. No, it's my wife describes me as a language chameleon. So it's like this. So like sometimes when I was in school, if Japanese visitors came to our school, my wife has observed me doing this. I will speak almost with a Japanese intonation, and yes, that is so. I agree with you. And so if an Italian visitor came to the school, I imagine that I would speak something like this. Because, you would try to accommodate. And I think accommodation is something that's part of our language repertoire. You negotiate. Because essentially, when we want to communicate, we want to be understood. And we want to understand. Right? So whatever intonation or stress, different patterns and everything, it's all in the act of communication. We can get very hung up. You speak very differently from me, and but essentially when you talk to someone, you want to be understood, you want to understand each other, right? And you want to negotiate meaning and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I understand your interest in linguistics, but that interest in linguistics supports our human interest in communicating with one another and getting to know one another. Mustn't lose the plot.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Jeff has an international and global perspective on language only because his clientele is international. So
I think I would agree with William. I find myself morphing into the environment to suit that dialogue, because I'm in a situation where I want to get my point across. So when I do a presentation in Japan, I find myself bringing a little bit of my limited amount of Japanese language inside. Then sometimes when they start nodding their head and they try to paraphrase the idea that I put across, then I will like, so. I would add in words like that in the structure.
And that all is to make a connection. And I think connection is what you want to do. It doesn't matter who you are. It's all about connections. Melanie?
Actually, I don't have much to add, but I just want to say that I've lived and studied in the US, UK, and Australia, and I think I'm the type, I don't really tend to morph as well. I'm quite, like, even sometimes the hawker center uncle also say like my got kantang accent, right? So I feel like the way I talk is quite standard to whoever I'm in contact with. But what's so interesting is whenever I'm in US, UK, Australia, they all think that I'm having their accent. And I'm actually wondering, is that the kind of English that my mom actually wanted to teach me, this kind of accentless Singaporean English, which other Westerners might think that, like, oh, I'm probably well-bred in their respective countries. But I'm not so sure. You can talk to me later and you can give me your sense. But I just think that I do like whatever Singaporeanness I might have in my accent. I do treasure it. It may not be the same as yours or yours. But to me, that's a lot. It's a big part of my identity, and I enjoy speaking Singlish. So at home, I do switch. In fact, I switch between proper English, Chinese because, you know, the Chinese is not so good with my son. I speak half English, half Chinese with him most of the time at home. And yeah, the Singlish is for fun. Usually, like, if we're laughing over something, we'll go, walao, and then just laugh, 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 because walao just sounds, you know, fun. But I think overall, I think it's important to be comfortable. I think William made a good point, to be comfortable with how you're speaking, and I think that probably goes to deeper issues of what you consider, who you consider yourself as a person and as a Singaporean.
Jeff?
Yeah, just want to add something. That's the benefit of having 3 children, okay? Because I can experiment on them. So what happened was, me and my wife, the first kid, right? We spoke only English, right? We spoke only English. His command of language is very powerful. In fact, right now I think he writes better than me. Then my second daughter, we had a combination of I'll do English, my wife would do Mandarin. Yeah. Then we find that the adaptation of English did come with some struggle because she was like, you don't hear of there. Now, and the third one, we deliberately brought her up only with Mandarin, even with my limited quota of Chinese being spoken a year. I try to, right? But then I think at some point when they are P1, they are able to kind of like align themselves pretty well. So I mean, if you want to study statistics, you can come research in my family. So I thought that is actually quite interesting. But from the three kind of social experiment that we kind of put ourselves through, we found that if we spoke Mandarin to the child when she's young, and her ability to pick up a new language is much faster. So effectively, my youngest is bilingual. And she does pretty well in school and you know the grasp of language on both language, and she actually loves both language. Whereas the first one, my firstborn, if he can do without Chinese lesson, he would try all his way, you know, to kind of drop the lesson. And I thought that's quite an interesting thing. And we've got friends who actually tried that with their 2 kids. We kind of observed a similar pattern. I can't explain this scientifically, but this is a life experience. And just to round up this topic on how do we kind of practice this at home, I think we first need to be there at home for our children, and when we spot something, we don't wait. We try to correct it. Not say correct. We offer the standard way almost immediately. Right? And that becomes a practice, and that can be quite fun. That can be quite fun. If they do something wrong, it's almost like they exhibit like a bad behavior, and then you for my family it's a death stare, and then they'll look at you and say, oh, okay, let's autocorrect. Yeah.
Yes, a gentleman up. Yes.
Hi. You guys talked about how we can nurture the love for the English language for children or people at home, right? So how about older adults, maybe like people working, middle age? Yeah, how do you think, is there a difference between children and people of the age range? How can we do that?
I'm going to share my story first. I came from a predominantly English-speaking family, as I said, and my Mandarin really wasn't so hot. I took Malay, and then I switched to Mandarin, so as you can tell, right, it wasn't really good. I never really spoke Mandarin again until I started work at MediaCorp 40 years ago, and I had Chinese colleagues, and in those days, our Chinese colleagues only spoke Mandarin. And then that made me speak Mandarin again. Then I spoke Malay to my Malay colleagues, and my Indian colleagues spoke English anyway. And now that I'm older, I have developed, I suppose, a love for Mandarin, which I never had before. That's because I suddenly, several years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, suddenly decided that I did enjoy watching period dramas on TV. And of course now it's all over YouTube and stuff like that. And because of that, I had to search for the dramas that had English subtitles. And that helped me understand Mandarin. So I now speak Mandarin a lot more than I did when I was in school. So an interest in something, for me as an adult learner, I think is helping me pick up a language that I started learning when I was very young.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to add, because I do part-time lecturing at SUSS, or formerly SIM. I teach media writing, feature writing, copywriting, etc., like anything mass comm related. I'm there. But what I notice is that most of my students are young office workers. You know, they are holding proper jobs and they are studying part-time to kind of maybe consider career options. So they come into the class actually quite defensive, what I notice, especially in the beginning, about their writing. But then, you know, like me, like I'm quite, yeah, I can be quite a grammar Nazi. So I usually am totally like ruthless with their scripts. So even though I'm not required to correct grammar, the school just says, just mark them for content. I will always correct every single script, and I take really long with each script because I feel that on my part, I just want to show them what's the right way of what's the correct way of writing a certain sentence. And what I always do is that when I return their scripts to them, I tend to do a top 10 mistakes I found in the scripts. I do that because they won't get so defensive. Even in office, last time when I used to correct, you know, I was in marketing last time, when I used to correct the uncles, I correct the English for like signages and things like that, they would flip out. And they get really angry and really, really like, you know, defensive. So I just wanted to, I would do this top 10 mistakes thing, kind of like for everyone to laugh over each other's mistakes, or like everyone knows they were guilty of all these mistakes. At the same time, I also try to encourage the intrinsic love of writing. Writing essentially is telling stories, and I often try to get them more excited about their story angle or the story idea they're going to do, as opposed to, this is 1,500 words, so how am I going to meet that? And them getting all stressed out by that task, and just really wanting to get excited about the story that they want to convey in the assignment. So that's just how I might do it.
When I was growing up, I mean, I love playing football, and it just so happened that where I was staying, there were a lot of kampongs, and the people I played with came from those kampongs. And I still remember, and many of them dropped out of school. I played football with them. And funnily enough, I don't know whether that was my first inkling that I would become a teacher, but they asked me to teach them English. So they were golf caddies and they will work in construction. But we play football every weekend, 2-3 times a week. And they would want to talk to me in English. And I think it's not teaching them English, but really you must be interested in them. You talk to them because you want to talk to them. I'm not here to teach you English. I'm here to communicate with you, and I'm going to use English. So if you don't understand, then let me explain, so on and so forth. So I always believe, even in the classroom, this whole teaching, learning process is based on a very strong fundamental truth. It's relationships that matter. It's not an exchange, like I'm going to teach you English, but I want to be your friend. And yeah.
I hope that answers your question, but you can talk to us further during the tea break. We're going to take just one more question from this gentleman who's got his hand up for the longest time. But I did see you right from the beginning, sir.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm my name is Tak Yen, and I'm actually a teacher with MOE, obviously. Yeah, just started teaching, and I'm an English teacher. So I'm here because I believe that in the average household in Singapore, the kids do not have access to standard English. Okay, and so I see my position as taking up that role, right? But just now, as the discussion was going on, something came to my mind. So there was this mentioning about accommodating to who you're speaking with as a sign of wanting to have solidarity or wanting them to understand you. And when we apply this situation to the house, the home setting, I think we start to see some sort of tension there. So the thing is, so far we've been fine with accommodating to people. But the discussion so far has been the case that we do not want to accommodate to our children. So the tension is this: when we aspire to teach our children good English, are we also running the risk of alienating them? Because what if our children are not of the sort who already appreciate the value of English and so on and so forth? So I think that one thing that can help many of the parents here is if you could give us some of your thoughts on how we can navigate this difficult situation where we risk
And Ek Keng is going
alienating
to
them.
share his thought. Come.
I'm not going to answer a question. I'm just going to add a question to that question. What happens when we come from a home setting where standard English is not spoken and we want to help our children? What do we do? So it's sort of the flip side of that question.
Okay, in the classroom, I always believed that I had to make my students fall in love with the English language first. Fall in love with it. And I had myriads of ways for them to do that. Because after they fall in love, then comes the hard part. The negotiation of the grammar, comprehension, everything. Then the staying in love. The staying in love with the language. So this idea of accommodation, this idea of tension, for me, is a moot point because whether it's my daughter at home or the children in my classroom, I always believe that the learning was important. It's important. It's not I have to do it. It's because I believe in it. I believe that if I teach you the wonders and intricacies of the English language, it will benefit you as it has benefited me. It's a wonderful thing. Why not join us in this wonderful teaching learning process? I'm not forcing you because I believe in it. Kids are not stupid, they're observers. Whether we are doing it because we have to or are we doing it because we want to and we believe in what we're doing.
And just to round up, if we all believe that speaking standard English is the way to go, whether in the home or in the workplace or anywhere in the world that we are in, then speak it. Go forth and multiply and all those things. Fall in love with the language, love the language, encourage your children to love the language. And speaking standard English or a level of English that is understood by anyone, anywhere, at any time. I think that's important. And we talked about making connections. Code switching is great, but we need to know the codes. So we need to teach our children the codes. What do we switch to or out of? That's important. We're going to break for tea, and then we'll come back for a plenary, and then there will be opportunity. I'm sorry that we didn't get around to taking more questions, but you have another opportunity later during the plenary session where you can ask more questions of the next panel that comes on. But please join me in thanking our panel for this afternoon, Melanie, William, and Jeff. And thank you so much. Enjoy your tea.